Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We are going to go over the week 2 NFL DFS slate at DraftKings and hopefully help you win some cash. If we do help you at all, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Helps us out quite a bit, lets us know we're doing something right, and also helps you get alerted to future videos. All right, let's not waste any time, Taylor. Let's get right into it. We're going to go position by position because last week I went game by game, and I'm sure I offered some in-depth analysis to some degree, but that took freaking forever. So we're not going to do that. All right, quarterback, here we go. First up, you can see on the board at Roto Grinders with the projections. That's how we're sorting them. Lamar Jackson is the top projected play, but he's also the most expensive by $700. And Patrick Mahomes is right behind him. Do you have a lot of interest in paying for either of these guys? And if you are going to pay all the way up at quarterback, which one of those two do you prefer?
I have a lot of interest in Mahomes. He's underpriced relative to where he normally is. 7K flat. He's normally in the 8K range historically. Plenty of weapons at his disposal, like we saw in week 1, Xavier Worthy being the biggest addition there. So even if Kelsey is slowing down, there are still stacking options with him. And the matchup against Cincinnati, I think, is perfectly fine. We saw the Bengals struggle with the Patriots last week. So not the worst spot in the world. Game with a pretty high total, pretty tight spread. And I don't really think Mahomes is going to be chalky. It looks like other guys that cheaper salaries are going to be a bit more popular. So Mahomes, as of now, is my highest exposed quarterback. And I feel pretty confident about it.
Well, I will have you know that currently he is the chalkiest quarterback at 16% ownership because of everything you said. It's not a bad play. He is
That's not what cheaper. I see, but
well, let me hit the refresh here. I'm seeing 16% ownership for him. Let's quickly refresh.
I wasn't looking at RG anyway.
Okay, so he is still at 16%. We'll see how it plays out, but it wouldn't shock me if he is chalky, because he's considerably less expensive than Lamar. He projects very well, second best projection of the slate. The Bengals don't really stand out as a scary matchup right now. They just look like, they don't know what's going on this year. And he has better weapons than he did last year. So yeah, discounted Mahomes is very interesting. I personally am probably going to go way down at the quarterback position. When we look at overall projection, Justin Fields at 5.K just looks like a screaming value. 4th best projection of the slate. And he's not even carrying ownership right now. We'll see how that adjusts, because obviously once he's officially named the week 2 starter, because Russell Wilson's somewhat in limbo. So I think that might spike, especially when people look at his projection and look at the fact that the Broncos seem to be a pretty decent matchup. But right now, as things stand, even if he is chalky, Justin Fields looks to me like the best play. That said, quarterback is incredibly deep. I'm with you on Mahomes being a good discount, and he has a good projection. But there are so many ways to go here if we want to. Kyler Murray at 6.6 looks really good. Jaden Daniels had 28 fantasy points last week, and he again looks good at 6.2, namely because Sam Darnold had a good game against this Giants defense, and Daniels didn't even do well through the air at all, and he still just crushed. So going down from Lamar and Mahomes in that mid-range tier, who really stands out to you at quarterback?
I kind of like Purdy a bit going into the Dome in Minnesota, just because, as we know, he's got great weapons at his disposal. He's a discount compared to Mahomes. I never feel bad about getting to Purdy in those stacks, of course. Joe Burrow, I'm afraid to say, also stands out to me a bit against Kansas City on the road. They looked abysmal, obviously. Still don't know about T. Higgins. I assume he's not going to play, but we'll see. Jamar Chase, I imagine, will play a bit more than he did last week. And the good thing about Burrow is you can stack him pretty easily with his weapons. You can get Chase. He's 7,800. You can play Yoshi Passing. Played 100% in snaps last week. Can do a ton, but if T. Higgins is out, Yoshi Pass is going to be another good value again. And then Gesicki is a decent enough punt at tight end. So I will be getting to Burrow a little bit, it looks like, in tournaments. I understand if you don't want to do that, but I think he's a pretty good play since people assume he's now back after one rough game. Kind of like that Prescott. He's priced up too, but dome game against the Saints. I don't think the Saints are what they looked like last week against Carolina. Of course, it's going to be a rude awakening for them. It is a good defense overall, excuse me, but just the kind of skinny stack with Dak and CD is always going to carry appeal. And it doesn't look like CD is going to be popular with Cooper Kupp being the mega chalk spend at receiver. There are just a million ways you can go. Baker Mayfield going into the Dome to play Detroit. They're a big underdog, but that should be good from game script perspective. If they fall into a deficit, they're going to have to. He's got great weapons. Godwin Evans, Rashad White, of course. Yeah, there are like a million ways to go, and I kind of like everyone. I even kind of like Sam Darnold a little bit as another punt in the Justin Fields range. He's a cheapie you can pair with Justin Jefferson. They have a tough matchup against the Niners, but they are at home. They're in a dome. They should fall behind in theory. Pass-heavy game script. It doesn't take much for Darnold to pay off 5-2. And I don't think he's really at risk of a benching if things don't go well early. So not the most comfortable play, but if people are going to flock to Fields, which I expect they will, I don't really see a reason not to get to Darnold as a pivot.
Yeah, I think if I was going to pay up, it would probably be Mahomes. I feel like there's a lot of different narratives going into some of these games. Like, obviously, if the Bengals are not totally toast, then Joe Burrow could have a really big game in a shootout with the Chiefs, and maybe the Bengals defense steps up and Mahomes really doesn't have that good of a game. So those are different narratives that go into the same game that we have to at least consider. But I just think as far as value goes, I think Fields is a guy that stands out for me. I do like the Purdy call just because Minnesota, at least after 1 week, appears to be a pass funnel defense. If they are going to stop Jordan Mason up front, does that mean we can be underweight on Mason? We can consider that. And does that then mean Purdy just thrives through the air? It's possible, although we don't know because the Giants didn't do anything in week 1, so we have no idea.
Like Mason's so cheap, you can just play Mason in your stack with Purdy. Like I don't think that's necessarily. You don't really have to fade Mason to get Purdy and play the leverage if you don't want to. Just because Mason is, if McCaffrey's out, is such an obvious top value on the slate.
Yep, yeah, 100% agree. I'm just saying if you wanted to push for harder leverage just because Mason is going to be so owned, you could do that. I personally am going to be eating the chalk on Jordan Mason, and we'll get to that when we touch running back. But yeah, I think Purdy with Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, however you want to play it, he is totally fine. Nice price at 6.1K. And he's a little bit more interesting just because Jaden Daniels is going to be chalky, carrying almost 14% ownership as things stand. And if that holds, then you're getting a pretty good guy at the same exact price, basically, with a slightly better projection. And he is half the ownership. So that is always something we want to consider doing. As far as punts go, are you interested in Fields? And whether or not you like Fields, are you seeing anybody in that like sub 6K price range that you feel good about? We got Trevor Lawrence at 5.7. You did mention Sam Darnold. Daniel Jones against the Commanders at 5.3 could be interesting. Even Malik Willis. I mean, he's not really a good player. No, just hear me out. He's not really a good player. But by the way,
I was laughing at Jones, not Willis. For the record.
Yeah. Well, he's facing the Commanders, so
I know.
Well, I'm not very interested in Daniel Jones personally because Malik Neighbors popped up on the injury report with a knee injury, so that's even I have less incentive to go after Daniel Jones. But yeah, but Malik Willis is 5K flat. We know he has a rushing floor. He actually looked pretty good in the preseason with the Titans, and even if he isn't good, you could try to trust Matt LaFleur in that system and the fact that he has a ton of weapons to work with around him. So I actually don't hate Malik Willis. He projects for 19 fantasy points just because we know he has that rushing floor. And if they're getting their ass kicked, he's just going to get, garbage time stats anyways. So I think for me, all roads lead back to Justin Fields. I think he's going to have a big game. It's just a crazy point per dollar play. I think he's got the best point per dollar price at quarterback, fourth best projection. He is my flag plant at quarterback this week, but I agree with basically everybody else you said. Anyways, to circle back, are there any other punts that you feel good about?
I do have interest in Fields. He's, as of now, Friday morning, so a lot of time left. He's my 5th highest exposed QB, behind Mahomes, Darnold, Burrow, and Purdy. Scroll down a bit. I like Mayfield, like I mentioned, at the sub 6K. I think he's 5'9" on DK. Malik Willis is someone that is on my radar more so than Daniel Jones. I understand the matchup for Jones is good, but I just don't trust that offense at all, even in the one of the best possible matchups, especially if Neighbors is banged up. It's really hard to have faith that they're going to gain any traction. And there's no telling, like he ran a little bit last week, but Jones is coming off a leg injury. There's no telling if he's the same scrambler he was before that, which was a big source of his fantasy appeal. So I have concerns about that. I would rather play Willis if I'm going all the way down, or Fields, obviously. Willis, in theory, is another guy who should be able to do something with his legs. And Indianapolis we saw them get gouged last week on the ground specifically by Houston. So, and the game is a tight spread. Like people are kind of writing off Green Bay, but I don't really think Indianapolis is a world beater on defense in particular. And Green Bay is at home. So things could go horribly wrong. We don't know about Malik Willis. He's played like 12 games in his career, like parts of games.
Right.
With the Titans. So this is a better situation. Like you said, he does have better weapons. And we saw what that can do for a quarterback with Baker Mayfield. Now that he has weapons, he's suddenly a franchise QB again. So I have some optimism with him. In a large field tournament, I would play him. I would not risk Malik Willis in single entry or anything like that.
No, I am going single entry this week. I'm really trying to be more focused and concentrated on my player pool and like what I want to do. And that's why I'm doing the Fields flag plant, but nobody you vouched for except for Sam Darnold. Maybe I think that's not the best matchup, but everybody else you spoke on, if I'm entering a lot of lineups, those are probably most of the guys I'm looking to first. I'll give another nod to Jaden Daniels. He is chalky, but if you're in, I know if you're in that Brock Purdy range though, he's not a bad play for sure. All right, let's move on to running back. Looks like we're pretty figured out at quarterback. At running back up top, Breece Hall has the best projection, and he's pretty chalky at 27%. Not really super sold on it personally. Obviously, he's a threat to score. He's going to have a big role. He can catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. But a couple things. Number one, Jets offense didn't look great in week one. Number two, the Titans defense seems pretty damn good. I know they're facing a rookie quarterback last week, but they've really shut them down. If you look at the stats, it's only 1 week, it's small sample size, obviously. Let me refresh this because it's not coming up for me at the moment. But if we look at running backs so far, the Titans graded out as the number 2 defense against fantasy running backs after 1 week, only behind the Saints. So I don't know. To pay a premium for a guy who might not be in a total groove and a not ideal spot on the road again, I don't really have that much interest in Breece Hall when you factor that in with the ownership. I think he's a fine play because he's Breece Hall, but I'm going to go away from him. As far as chalk goes, I think we're in alignment here with eating the Jordan Mason chalk. 49ers have an amazing offense. He proved that he can do everything that they need him to do with 25 fantasy points last week in what is probably, at least on paper, a tougher matchup against the Jets. So that is an auto lock for me. If I'm doing a single entry, Mason is going into my lineup. And if I'm doing 150 max or 20 max or whatever, he's going to be in most of my lineups. I'd like your thoughts on Breece, by the way. I'm pretty sure you're just going to double down what I'm saying on Mason, but speak to how you feel about Breece. And then in these upper tier guys, as far as projection goes at running back, what guys like up above 17 point projection for the week are you feeling really good about?
The Mason thing, it's hard to get away from. He is just so cheap, and he played a ton last week, and they're happy to give him the ball. And the matchup's good, and they're in a dome. But we've seen countless cheap running backs just do fucking nothing over the years. So I'm fully prepared for him to get 6. But it is what it is.
But they weren't cheap chalk running backs in the 49ers system, though, right? It's usually like some assy Panther or Brown running back.
Yeah. So he's just a great play, and I don't think you should overthink it. But
yep.
At the high end, I do think Breece Hall is a good play. They ran the ball a lot last week, even though they fell behind early and never really showed signs of coming back. I think they ran the ball like more than 61% of the time. He played over 80% of the snaps. Like he's just clearly a bell cow for them. I don't know if they want to take it easy on Rodgers early on. It makes sense, I think. I'm not fully sold on the Titans either. Like you said, they were playing Caleb Williams in his first game. No telling what to expect there. Ownership, not great, but I think he's a pretty safe play in terms of floor, so I don't mind spending on him. Kyron Williams is another one that stands out, just playing a ton. The Blake Corum thing was obviously bullshit. He played 91% of the snaps. It just looks like he's the guy again until further notice. He's 6'8", so arguably underpriced for the role he's going to play. They go into Arizona in a dome elite matchup against the Cardinals. Really don't see any reason not to play a lot of Kyron Williams this week. Who else is in the high end? Is Ramondre considered high end because he's 6'2"?
If we're only speaking on projection at the moment, yeah, he's got the fourth best projection of the slate. So I feel like he's Trap City, man.
Ramondre? Just because it's New England or what?
Yeah, it's New England. He's going to be a little bit owned. It is a good price. His role is massive. They clearly want to just run, which is nice. Always good to see. And if they're losing, he's still a threat to be involved in the passing game, even with Antonio Gibson there. So I don't think he's a bad play. Good price still. I just think he might be a little bit trappy. I think the projection's kind of overshooting, the whole situation and everything. I'm not super enamored with the ownership either.
Yeah, but I think the matchup's okay. Like Seattle should be improved on defense, but I'm not fully sold that they're all the way there yet.
Well, they were fourth best against fantasy running backs in week 1. Worth noting.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's one game. I don't think we can put too much stock into that. And he's cheap. Like if he was $7K, I'm fine with fading that. But at 6'2", there's not a lot else. Like there are okay plays in that range. Kenneth Walker on the other side of that game, questionable as of now. If he's in, I think he's interesting. If Ramondre is going to be far more chalky than he is. Jerome Ford was a guy I was on last week, kind of salvaged it with a late touchdown. Cleveland looked like fucking horse shit, but he played 75% of the snaps.
To be more specific, Deshaun Watson looked like horse shit.
The whole team looked really bad, but
I don't know. Watson it's Deshaun Washington.
I understand that he's terrible, but it's not like Amari Cooper dropped a touchdown. No one really played well.
He was probably just surprised that the ball was in his hands.
Jerome Ford, I just think is a fine play. Big roll under 6K. Jacksonville, not a scary matchup on the road. Yeah, there's once again quite a bit to like at running back. I'm not really getting to the Lions, which scares me a bit. Jahmyr Gibbs just looks a little overpriced. David Montgomery for the timeshare they're in. They do want to run the ball clearly, which is why I'm not really on Jared Goff this week. But again, it's hard to pay a premium essentially for one of these guys if they're going to split the work for the most part. I do think Josh Jacobs is also interesting. 6,500. New quarterback in there. In theory, they should run the ball with Jacobs comfortably. Against Indianapolis, like we said, they got murdered by Joe Mixon last week. Jacobs is 6'5", played a big role last week. They brought him in to play a big role. So I just think if they don't want to put too much responsibility on the shoulders of Willis, then Jacobs makes sense as kind of a guy they would rely on heavily.
Yeah, like I said, I'm with you on Mason. He's basically a lock for me. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't know what to tell you. He is not the regular cheap chalk. This is it's a different, unique circumstance where the cheap dude is in an awesome system and just looks like an autoplay. Yeah, I think everything you said about Breece Hall sounds pretty good. I just think if he's going to be 27% owned, I would rather pivot to what now looks like an unowned Jonathan Taylor in what appears to be a way better spot. So Green Bay is at home. Their defense, in theory, could compensate for the fact that they don't have their starting quarterback. And we could just look back at this and be like, this was silly because obviously facing the Eagles, that's not an easy matchup, right? But Saquon Barkley made them look stupid. Like Saquon Barkley ran all over them, did whatever he wanted. They had big play after big play. They gave up 33 or 34 points in week 1. So by all accounts, the Packers defense still isn't good. And if that's the case, the Colts have a running quarterback and they have Jonathan Taylor. So one of those two dudes is probably going to go off. And I do not mind taking my chances on it being JT at 5% ownership when a guy $300 less is going to be way more owned than him. So that would be my running back flag plant outside of Mason. Mason is the ultimate flag plant. I'm just eating the chalk. And then the second play I want to get to, if I can, would be JT over the Brees, who is the second chalkiest back on the slate. I also am with you, really like Kyren. That's a discounted price for Kyren, who we know can get 30 plus fantasy points. Arizona for week 1 was okay, but I like to kind of go back and forth as far as like, how much am I going to overreact to week 1 and how much am I going to look at what they did last year? Arizona Cardinals were second worst against fantasy running backs last year. So if we want to lean on that at all, and the fact that the Rams are just a better team and probably going to be leading, then Kyren looks awesome at 6.8K. Have no problem with him. And if I can't get up to JT, no issues with settling down with Kyren. Some of these other guys I feel like are either traps or a little bit overpriced. Alvin Kamara against the Cowboys, that could be a shootout, but that feels kind of overpriced at 7K. Stevenson feels a little bit trappy to me, but the price is good. Let's see who else. Obviously, Zach Charbonnet. If Kenneth Walker's out, that looks like a pretty damn good value. I agree with Josh Jacobs. In theory, if he can get fed and can get going, he could be an awesome play at 6.5K. The only issue there would be they might just load up the box and it just might be disastrous. Because early on in week 1, he had like 8 runs in a row where he had less than 3 yards or something. It was really bad for a while. So if Malik Willis cannot establish a threat through the air at all, Jacobs, that could be rough sledding. And by the way, he is on the injury report. He was limited in practice. So Emmanuel Wilson at 4.5K could be a very interesting value to pair with Mason. And we just go deep down on running backs and pay up elsewhere. Just trying to see what else stands out. The ageless James Conner was good in week 1. 6.4K seems okay. Rashad White still has a huge role. 6.3. He's totally fine. So I think you noted it. The mid-range for running back looks pretty damn good. I mean, like there's a lot of good options here. Not paying 6.7K for Derrick Henry against an underrated Raiders defense. Also, their head coach came out and said they're not going to feed him the ball 30 times a game. And then you obviously have Lamar kind of siphoning, rushing work. Last guys I'll mention here are kind of like all in the same price range would be Tony Pollard and your boy that you said, Jerome Ford. So I don't trust Jerome Ford in this matchup straight up on the ground, but I do trust him in this matchup as a receiver because Deshaun did dump it off to him, I think 5 or 6 times in week 1, and Deshaun sucks. So I feel like that's going to happen more. By the way, the team that allowed the most catches out of the backfield of running backs in week 1, the Jaguars. So I think Jerome Ford at 5.9K in a game they're probably going to be trailing in looks really, really good. And I think he gets that production, as a receiver. And then if you want to pivot off of him, is he carrying ownership right now? Yeah, he's going to be owned because he projects really well. So if you want to pivot off of Ford, I think Pollard is a pretty interesting pivot. He's not going to carry any ownership. He dominated the touches compared to Tyjae Spears in week 1. If we can hope that sticks, we can also lean on the fact that the Jets defense looked abysmal in week 1. The 49ers did whatever they wanted to. And then obviously, even if Pollard's rushing production doesn't get there, he is another guy who can do some damage as a receiver out of the backfield. So like you said, a lot of different ways to go. I do think it makes sense to take a stand. Obviously, in a single entry, I am doing probably JT or Kyren if it makes sense to pair with Mason. And if it doesn't, and I need to, and I end up wanting to go to a wide receiver there instead, then I do not mind going down to Ford or Pollard.
Did you watch the long J.K. Dobbins runs last week?
Yeah, Dobbins looks good, man.
No,
and
he
he's
doesn't.
facing
He completely ran out of gas. He was a wide open field. He died at the end of both of those runs.
Yeah, because he's not used to it yet. It's okay. He's getting there.
Completely cooked.
No, he's not cooked. That burst. Dude, that's all going to come back. I don't.
Austin Eckler 2.0, just no steam at all.
No. Eckler has never had the explosiveness that J.K. Dobbins. I think Dobbins is just
J.K. Dobbins did not look explosive at all.
Yeah, he did. He burst through the line of scrimmage and past the linebackers. He just got chased down. I don't really want to play him because you can't really rely on that hyper efficiency all the time, but the Panthers are a dream matchup, no doubt about it. So for GPPs, he is in play.
I think he's cheap, so I think he's okay. He played almost 60% of the snaps. By the way, earlier I said the Jets threw the ball or ran the ball in like 61% of the plays. I flipped it. It was passing on 61% of the plays.
I don't know why. That's stupid. Their game plan. I don't know if Rodgers just dictates everything and just like messes it up, but when you have Breece Hall and Rodgers is coming off a torn Achilles and you're on the road against the Niners, you should have been running as much as you could.
They ran it a lot early, and then it fucking didn't work because he was getting stopped in the line every play, so they had to pivot.
Yeah, I mean,
61% of the plays. It was passing on 61% of the plays.
I don't know why. I don't know why. Those stupid. Their game plan. I don't know if Rodgers just dictates everything and just like messes it up, but when you have Breece Hall and Rodgers is coming off a torn Achilles and you're on the road against the Niners, you should have been running as much as you could.
They ran it a lot early, and then it fucking didn't work because he was getting stopped in the line every play, so they had to pivot.
Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes, I guess. All right, moving over to wide receiver. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb starts up top, best projection, and weirdly not that owned. He is very expensive at 8.8K, but if I can get to CeeDee, I am very interested in doing that. And that's kind of what I was talking about. It's kind of either I get to CeeDee or I get to JT at running back. I'm kind of flipping between those two as far as my like other pay up. But there's possibly no Marshawn Lattimore for the Saints. And this game is in Dallas in a dome on the AstroTurf. So CeeDee looks awesome after being kind of quiet in week 1. If I can get to CeeDee comfortably, I do want to play him, especially at not that much ownership. The other guy that really stands out is going to be Cooper Kupp. No Puka Nacua. He's on the IR for the next 4 weeks at least. And he had 35 fantasy points last week. So, I mean, we're looking at wide receiver 1 overall territory here with Kupp. If he's going to have this crazy role, that is chalk. I do not mind eating. 1.2K cheaper than CeeDee. 7.6 is a massive discount for what Kupp can be. And then, I have no problem with like a bounce back game out of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Justin Jefferson, 8.3. That is borderline discount too, in a game where they'll probably be throwing a lot. And then to round out that top 5 guys, as far as projection goes, Jamar Chase, like you noted, like you seem to be into the idea of playing Burrow. Obviously, if Burrow bounces back at 6.3K, Burrow is definitely a nice discount, right? And if he's going to, and even if he doesn't really, Jamar Chase looks like a discount at 7.8K as well. Problem is, it's not really the most amazing matchup, and I don't really trust Burrow right now. So of those guys, Chase probably would be the last guy I'm going to put in, but I do see that he has upside, and it's a good price. So how are you feeling about these first 5 guys on the board?
Yeah, it's hard to get away from Kupp. 21 targets is something special, I think. And they're playing Arizona. Like you said, they were awful against the run. They also were awful against the pass last year.
Yeah, they're bad.
I don't think they're going to be a lot better. So
no
Nacua. He's going to feast in theory, and he's probably underpriced for the role he's going to play. So he looks very good in a PPR format on DK, obviously. CeeDee, I mentioned him with Dak. I mentioned Jefferson with Darnold. Those are guys I'll probably just be getting to in stacks. I'm not really going to be playing them as one-offs. Ditto for Chase. He's a pure stack play, I think. If you're going to play Burrow, which I don't think many will, although Chase does have some ownership that I'm looking at. Among the high end, it's really Kupp and then a big gap and then everybody else in terms of like value, point per dollar. CeeDee is probably overpriced in a vacuum, but I think the matchup's okay enough. The other quote-unquote high-end receiver that's really on my radar is Debo. 6,800. Just super involved last week on the ground and through the air. They were just trying to feed him as much as they possibly could. Ayuk and Kittle were kind of fringe targets last week. Debo looks like the guy once again, especially with McCaffrey in theory out. We've mentioned the great matchup at Minnesota in the Dome. He got 9 targets. He played many snaps, I believe, 74%. Just undervalued for the role he's going to play. And I think Mason garnering that much ownership means Debo maybe could fly under the radar a little bit compared to Jordan Mason.
Debo coming in at 22% ownership right now, but honestly, it's not about whether or not that is worth eating as far as chalk goes, because you're absolutely right. At 6.8K, he looks really good. Ayuk at 6.5K looks good. The only issue really is, are you going to pick the right one? You could stack them both with Purdy, but then watch George Kittle get 3 touchdowns, right? Like, it's just the 49ers offense is always tough to predict. I think Mason is obviously just the safest play that they have to offer, but absolutely in GPPs, if you want to fire up any combination of the 49ers passing game, I am right there with you. Same with Rashee Rice here, coming in really chalky at 28%. He's the highest owned receiver on the board because he's not expensive enough for what his role is and what he's capable of doing. I'm probably going to leverage that ownership and get to Kelsey at tight end if I can. But Rashee Rice at 6.7K is absolutely a good play. I'm like very much, if we're talking about flag plants all the time, I think it's number one, it's Kupp. That is chalk. I'm going to eat. I don't really care. If you want to leverage that ownership, though, obviously you can go to DeMarcus Robinson or Tyler. What's his freaking name?
Johnson.
Tyler Johnson. He looked pretty explosive last week. Obviously, Robinson also is going to have a more involved role just naturally. Those guys are pretty cheap. I think 4K and 4.3K. If you want to do that, you can. That is very much GPP for life thinking and just like leaning into variance, because if they can, the Rams are going to be as concentrated as they can via Kyren and Kupp. It's just what they're going to do if they can. As far as guys coming down here that stand out, I don't hate Garrett Wilson. The matchup stinks. But like you said, we don't always have to just like take what week 1 shows us and just trust it. So what we could do is trust that Garrett Wilson is an explosive receiver who gets targeted a ton. Aaron Rodgers has a history of just funneling targets to his number 1 guy. And if that holds and Wilson can bust one and or just score in general, he's too cheap at 7.1K. So I do not mind landing on him like in the flex play. Mike Evans' price has ticked up a little bit. He's Mike Evans. He can always ball out. I'm probably going to go away from his price, though. I think Chris Godwin at 6K for the Bucs, if that gets into a shootout, is a much more appealing play. I really do like Malik Neighbors if he's healthy and ready to go. He did pop up on the injury report with a knee injury, so I don't really trust him. But that is such a good price and such a good matchup. I would love to play him if I could. He's probably my second favorite wide receiver if he's full go. Marvin Harrison Jr. looks slow as shit in week 1. Like, I don't know what his deal is. I am not paying almost 7K to pay for him. I'm going to wait and see if he can figure it out. Moving on down the list here as far as values, I don't mind George Pickens as a stacking with Justin Fields, but if I'm being honest, I'm probably going to go into the week with Fields running naked. I don't need to take chances on shitty Steelers wide receivers. Not that Pickens is shitty, but he's probably going to draw coverage from Patrick Surtain, so I don't really want to do that. Let's talk about deep values, though, as we come down here. Guys that are not projecting amazingly, guys that are not going to garner a lot of ownership. Do you see anybody in like the sub 5K range that you really want to take a chance on? I'll just lead the conversation right away. The first one that stands out, if Malik Neighbors is out, Wan'Dale Robinson, 12 targets and 6 catches in week 1. It's probably going to be a little bit of a shootout because neither of these defenses are really that good. So Wan'Dale at 4.3K looks like one of the better value plays. And the other guy you had mentioned, how do you say his name? Andre Iosivas? Okay. 3.8K for a guy who got 6 targets last week. If T. Higgins is out again, he looks pretty good too. I'd probably go Wan'Dale, then Iosivas. So that's where I'm at with the value. What other value guys are you liking at wide receiver?
I think, Wan'Dale's okay. You mentioned the Rams, Tyler Johnson, 3.3, just super cheap.
Oh, he's only 3.3. Okay.
Yeah, DeMarcus Robinson, 4K. I think they're both fine, even with Kupp. Like, you can super stack them a little bit. I don't think you even have to play Stafford. You can play Kupp. You can play one of these cheap guys. Just kind of a little double stack without the QB is fine. Iosivas, like you mentioned, very on my radar. Alan Lazard. He got a touchdown on a free play. He got a touchdown in garbage time. But
tough.
And that wasn't even Rodgers on the second throw. He's 3-3. No, it was not on the second throw.
No, Rodgers was in the game.
Tyrod Taylor threw him.
That's right. Yeah, Rodgers came out. You're right. My bad.
But Rodgers does like his guys. He clearly trusts Alan Lazard still. And he's cheap. He got 9 targets last week. Looking up his snap count at the moment, he played every single snap of the game for the Jets.
It still feels gross, though. Alan Lazard, you know that if they can help it, they're going to get Mike Williams more work, and they're going to funnel targets to Garrett Wilson.
I saw Mike Williams is going to get a little more work, but he's still going to be on a limit. He was on a 15-play limit. So in theory, Lazard may not play every single snap again, but again, he's 3-3. So you don't really need him to go off for 2 touchdowns again in order for him to pay off. Just as an okay value, if people are going to play Tyler Johnson or Iosivas instead. I don't think you're crazy to throw a dart at Lazard, given the role he appears to have at the moment. Other than that, you kind of ran it down. I think Ayuk is a fine play. Mike Evans, 2 touchdown dependent. Didn't even talk about Amon-Ra after his stinker on Sunday night, but he is Amon-Ra. It is a dome game against the Buccaneers. There's certainly bounce back potential there. Jameson Williams, I think, is questionable, but he's also pretty cheap. He's now had, I think he was awesome in the NFC title game? And then in week 1, he also went off. So perhaps he's kind of coming around. I'm not super into Goff Dax this week, but I do think the Lions receivers individually are perfectly fine plays.
Yeah, I when we opened it first up, I mentioned that I like St. Brown in the sense that it seems like a pretty good bounce back / get right spot for him. He was very quiet in week 1. It felt like the Jameson Williams coming out party. Obviously, Jameson Williams is in play. He's still pretty cheap for what he showed he can do. The only issue is he seems still fairly one-dimensional in his role. They're either going to use him on sweeps or they're going to take shots down the field. So if the shots down the field aren't there, he could easily bottom out pretty quickly. I feel like Ross St. Brown's probably going to get more balls his way, so he is just the way better play, in my opinion. One other guy I will mention, it's kind of gross, but he's cheap, 4.1K. It is kind of a price range that I'm finding myself land when I'm hand building in the flex. Quentin Johnston for the Chargers. Obviously, he is still a raw guy, but he's a beast physically. He played 67% of the snaps last week. Wasn't really needed in a game. The Chargers were up the whole game. Maybe that's going to be the case again at Carolina. But the Panthers did give up some big plays in the passing game. Did Derek Carr throw 3 or 4 touchdowns? I know he had a big long one to Rashid Shaheed. So the opportunity is going to be there for Johnston to take a couple shots down the field and take over. So I do not hate him at 4.1K as another punt option. All right, let's go over to tight end. We're running a little bit long here. It is what it is. Hopefully this is helpful, and we'll just keep rolling. And we'll just won't spend a lot of time on defense because it's such a crapshoot. So at tight end, Travis Kelce leads the way with the best projection. Right behind him are Trey McBride and Sam Laporta. I don't think you can go wrong with any of these guys. I think it's a little bit interesting that Sam Laporta has half the ownership that both of them do. So that could put Sam Laporta a little bit more on my radar than I thought it was going to be. Worth noting, the Buccaneers are not that good against tight ends. But Travis Kelce looks like another bounce back candidate. Best projection of the slate. The Bengals were second worst against fantasy tight ends last year. And he was so quiet in week 1. I just would imagine it makes sense that he'd get a little bit more involved and is a pretty good bet to score touchdowns. So my flag plant at tight end is probably going to be Kelce. I think he is one of the safer plays. And there's not a whole lot of value at tight end that I feel very comfortable with, but we'll touch on a couple that I do. Just right off the bat here, these top 3 guys, are you looking at them and which one do you like the most?
Kelce and McBride are quite a ways in front of Laporta for me, but it doesn't look like any of them are going to be like mega chalk anyway. It's pretty spread out among tight ends, so I'm not concerned about that. I mentioned Mahomes being my favorite quarterback. Kelce is my favorite tight end kind of by default at the high end. McBride's fine, not really getting to Murray, but I think McBride on his own is perfectly playable. But yeah, the high end is pretty gross. This is a position that sucks balls.
It sure does. Okay, so I will mention a couple other guys though. Number 1, Mark Andrews, 5K flat for what Mark Andrews is capable of is pretty gross. The Raiders, I think, are not the worst matchup in the world for tight ends. Kind of middle of the pack, it looks like, at least after last week. But he's just too cheap. I think taking a chance on him at 5K is totally in play. He's not going to be owned. George Kittle, like you said, you like Purdy. Kittle's in play at 5.5K. Jake Ferguson is the best points per dollar play if he's healthy and ready to rock. The Saints are not a good matchup for tight ends in theory, but I think their starting safety might be out, which could impact that. So at 4.7K, if Ferguson is not going to be limited at all, he is pretty interesting and certainly in my radar. As far as value goes, Colby Parkinson could see a little bit more targets now that Puka isn't there. It could just kind of roll his way. 3.1K, that's an okay punt. I think you mentioned Gesicki. He's okay at 3 point. I don't feel good about him at 3.1K, but he's there. Brock Bowers is explosive, 4.4K. I think that's okay. And then one other punt I liked was Greg Dulcich for the Broncos. He had a pretty good amount of snaps last week. Didn't really turn them into much, but he was out there quite a bit. And I think who are they facing this week? The Steelers. Pittsburgh. They are 5th in fantasy points allowed after 1 week. So obviously it's just 1 week. You don't know what's going to happen. But if he's going to be out there, he is an athletic player. He's pretty explosive. I do not mind taking a chance on him at 2.9K. That said, it's basically Kelce for me. He's the guy I like the most. And I don't mind. That's a discounted Kelce. Like usually if Kelce is in midseason form, he's like 7.5K. So I like that a lot. Let's wrap it up with defense. Let's just tell me, who do you like at defense up top? And are you what's your strategy here this week? Are you just kind of going with what the system gives you, or is there a defense you want to prioritize?
Yeah, I never really care about defense. I just fill out the rest of the lineup, and then whatever defense fits is who I play.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, usually the system favors what? A really cheap defense, right? That might be in an advantageous spot, but mostly prioritizing price, right? Because it's valuing.
Like the Jaguars at 3-1 against Deshaun Watson looked fine. Green Bay, in theory, kind of a cheap defense. Denver against Pittsburgh. We don't know what the Steelers' offense is going to be like with Justin Fields necessarily. Carolina against a maybe punchless Chargers. They're only 2,300. I know it's the Panthers, but yeah, like
I tried them last week. They gave up 47 fucking points. So
yeah, well, defense is not worth spending time on.
No, it's really not. I think also you can mention the Commanders at 3K and the Giants at 2.7K. Obviously, the defenses aren't very imposing, so the offenses could have success here, but the offenses aren't very good either. So either of those defenses are also in play. Lions at 2.9K. They look okay. I mean, Baker Mayfield can be really, really good like he was in week 1. They can come back and eat 5 sacks and throw 3 picks. So you just never know how it's going to go. The only advice I would give for defense is I just don't like playing a very expensive defense. I mean, Cowboys are 4K. They're the most expensive defense on the board, and they're facing a Saints team that I thought was going to be bad, but maybe they're good. Maybe this is a shootout, right? So don't really want to pay.
Last week, so
I know. I'm just saying I don't really want to pay 4K to find out. I don't want to pay 3.8K for the Jets, who looked absolutely terrible defensively last week, even though they're facing Will Levis, who just went up in flames to end the game against the Bears. I don't know. I don't want to pay for those to find out. I'm okay with the mid-range, but with you, I would let the system do the work, or I would just kind of punt defense. All right, that is going to do it for us. We ran about 10 minutes more than we wanted to, but hopefully that extra 11 minutes helps you figure out what to do with your lineups. I would obviously suggest using a lineup optimizer, whether you are going to do a single entry or enter a lot of contests. Just helps you kind of figure out what other plays are out there. And then you can also factor in, the matchups and the player projection themselves and the ownership projections. Anyways, hopefully that all helps you. If it does, give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. Thanks for watching and good luck.